Hi, I'm Marc Loftus, editor of Post, and thanks for joining us for another Post TV podcast. This episode is an interesting episode that we've put together on women in the pro audio / post audio industry. And I'm happy to be joined by three women who have pretty remarkable careers that they're going to share some insight to. Let me start by introducing in the UK right now, Nina Hartstone, who's a supervising sound editor and a member of AMPS, the Association of Motion Picture Sound. She's worked on films that include Gravity, Bohemian Rhapsody, The Hours, and going all the way back to the original Batman. Nina, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Alexandra Fehrman, over on the West Coast in LA, is a supervising sound editor who has worked on film and streaming projects, including the Amazon Prime video popular series, The Boys. Alexandra, thanks for joining us.
Hi, happy to be here.
Excellent. And of course, Hannah Bliss, who's VP of Marketing North America for Focusrite right now. But Hannah, your background goes beyond the sound side. I think you had told me that you were involved in interactive media production at some point and even practical VFX for the earlier Harry Potter films. So look forward to hearing about your career as well.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Excellent. I don't know if anybody wants to go first, or Nina, how about you? I know it's been a long day for you. Maybe you want to get going. Tell us a little bit about your role as a supervising sound editor. I know that Alexandra has a similar title. Maybe for people who are not familiar with what exactly that job entails, you can give us a little bit of a background on what your duties are for any job that you may be working on.
Sure. So as a supervising sound editor, my role is to kind of oversee the sound editorial on a film, which is we start generally in post-production. We will take on all the material that was recorded on set by the production mixer, and then we will do all our own recordings during post-production to add to it, whether it be dialogue, effects, Foley, those sorts of things. And we will oversee the whole process of editing all that sound together, and then chaperoning it through the mix, the final mix, which the re-recording mixers will do, where they're balancing all those different types of sounds. So it's kind of we're in sort of the middle part of the sound process that starts with the production mixer on set, goes into sound editorial and finishes with the mix. But we do oversee it all the way to the end, and we do liaise with our production mixer early on before we come onto the project full time normally.
Okay, great. Alexandra, I know that you have a similar title. Nina has worked specifically on film projects. You, Alex, have worked on film and streaming series. Do you have anything to add as far as what your role is as a supervising sound editor, or maybe anything different than what Nina might have mentioned?
The process is exactly how Nina described it. I will add that there's a time in the post-production process where you sit down with the director, and then usually on a series with the executive producer, and have a spotting session. And that's kind of when the creative part really starts to percolate, because that's a chance for you to get into the mind and the sonic goal of the directors that you're working with. And then, yes, from there, all of that world is built and then pushed onto the mix stage, where we work with either executive producers and or directors to accomplish a pristine sound mix using all of those ideas that they had, putting everything into place, making sure it's nice to the ear, making sure the environment that we're making is a comfortable one for people to sit in and watch the film, making sure that the emotional cues are felt, and yes, we see it through to the very end. It's usually the very last thing that they do before it goes to a theater. So it's often an emotional time as well.
I can imagine sometimes stressful too.
Oh, yes.
Hannah, you have an interesting position because you're on the technology and marketing side. Obviously, Alexandra and Nina are on the creative side, they're hands-on mixing, but somebody has to make these products that make it into the studios. And that's something, a part of a business in the pro audio field that a lot of people maybe aren't even aware of, that, okay, somebody's manufacturing them, somebody's marketing them, somebody's installing them, somebody's liaisoning with the studios. Can you tell us a little bit about what your role is as a VP of Marketing North America for Focusrite? Maybe even a little bit background on Focusrite itself and how they tie into the pro audio segment.
Yeah, of course. So Focusrite's a British company founded in the mid-80s, famed for creating incredibly expensive large mixing consoles. And as times kind of went on, those mixing consoles, they were very expensive to upkeep. The chairman, the owner of our company, wanted to get more into that home recording space and make recording more affordable, basically. So started making small format audio interfaces. And over the years, those audio interfaces have grown into, multi-million, multi-billion dollar audio engineering industry, basically, where manufacturers like Focusrite come in. So the Focusrite company itself, that brand, is known for audio interfaces and mic pre's, so anything used to record, whether it be instruments or synthesizers or vocals. But then the Focusrite group, as we're now known, actually own 9 different brands now, of which 3 of them I'm the VP of marketing for. So that's Focusrite, Focusrite Pro, and Novation, who are known to make creative instruments like keyboard controllers, synthesizers, groove boxes, things like that. So my position as VP of marketing, I lead the strategy and the team here in the US. And we basically try and get our products in the hands of people like Nina and Alexandra, so that the audio that they're recording through, that they're mixing through, is as high quality as they need it to be. But that doesn't stop us also serving the need of a bedroom producer, a podcaster, a very early out starting singer-songwriter. So we make products that are anywhere from $160 that you could record a Grammy-winning song on, all the way up to thousands of dollars worth of mic pre's that can be outfitted in a high-end studio or a post-production facility.
And for somebody who's been in the industry for a long time like me, that has changed over the years because, like you said, multi-million-dollar equipment and studios and mixing consoles, and now people capable of doing stuff in bedroom type setups. And for a manufacturer to adapt to that and make products that scale, pretty amazing what's happened in the years that have gone on. Hannah, how about we talk a little bit about your background that led you to this position right now? One thing that I thought was interesting when I spoke with you all independently was that the idea of having a podcast like this, or a panel getting together and talk about women in the field, is something that was kind of needed for the industry. It's not something that is necessarily being promoted. I mean, I see a lot of news coming across my desk, and I'm aware that women are doing some great things in different segments of the industry, but maybe as a whole, the industry may not be aware of that. So it's interesting, that to have all 3 of you together to talk a little bit about your career. And I thought maybe, Hannah, you could start with yours, because it's an indirect route to get to where you were. I'm sure you didn't start out saying, okay, I'm going to be a VP of one of these companies, but yet here you are, you've ascended to that. So can we talk about your earlier days?
Yeah, of course. The concept of women in the music industry is definitely one met with a lot of different opinions. The women in the industry say, nope, we're here, we're loud, we're proud, we're doing our thing. But then looking at what you see maybe at trade shows, or what you see on adverts in magazines and things like that, women are definitely on the lesser kind of recognized side of things. So podcasts, interviews, things like this, just letting other young women and anyone in their career know that there is a route for them is very important. So my career, it started, I definitely didn't think I would be in the audio industry. I wanted to be in the kind of creative arts side of things. So that's why I went to university for interactive media production, which I remember telling you, Mark, involved me handing my my dissertation and my final interactive project in on a CD-ROM, which is probably dating me. So there no Dropbox at the time to do any of that. Right. But I always thought I would be in some sort of creative field. I wanted to interact with customers. I wanted to inspire them to do whatever the company I was working for wanted them to do. So I worked for Focusrite in the UK straight out of university as a marketing coordinator when it was a much smaller company. It was only the one, the Focusrite and Novation. And I was very new. I didn't think I would be in marketing, but I knew a couple of people in the company who advised me to interview for this marketing position. So that's one kind of piece of advice early on is kind of don't underestimate simply what your personality suits you for. You know, marketing is a very personable industry. So being able to have the gift of the gab, as we say in the UK, is a good thing. It's a positive thing. So I worked with them for just a couple of years before wanting to go off and really doing something a bit more artistically creative myself, because I wasn't a musician. My father's a professional musician. I grew up with a studio in my house, so I knew the concept of a recording studio and everything like that. But I knew I wanted to do something a bit more artistic than I was currently doing. So I went off and was working in a warehouse, like doing life casting, which is like full body molds and sculpting and putting blood and goo on werewolves and things in some movies, things like Clash of the Titans and things like that, if you remember that from the noughties. But it wasn't that I worked on Harry Potter. It was actually that Harry Potter destroyed my chance of a career in that industry, because when 7 Harry Potter movies finish after 10 years of lots of model makers, as we're called, were out of business, me as a 1 year into the industry had no chance of getting a job when 10,000 people suddenly needed a job after 10 years of employment. So I started to look for another job in a creative field, and luckily Focusrite actually called me back up and said that they were opening up the US office, and I had always been interested in moving to the States, and would I be interested in a promotion and to go over and start the office here. So that's how I became a marketing manager, and then over the last 12 years I've built up the team, built up the office to become the VP. So I've stepped through 4 different marketing positions to be where I am. So that's my career in a nutshell.
I can imagine how many trade shows you've done over the years.
There's a lot of badges hanging on the back of my door in the office.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine. Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Awesome.
Alexandra, how about we go to you? I know that you had told me you started in a recording studio, music studio, and you were also as a tape operator. Now you're a supervising sound editor. What was your earliest job? Did you go to school, to learn that type of field? Did you just happen upon it? Like, what was the background that led you to where you are now?
Well, now I'm actually primarily a re-recording mixer, and I do supervise as well. But I always wanted to be a mixer. I started as a teenager. I was taking guitar lessons. I was not immediately great at guitar. I reached a plateau. I got a little frustrated and walked down the hall to the place that I was taking lessons was like a rehearsal space that was attached to a recording studio. So I wandered down the hall and I popped in and I asked if I could start working there, which was bold, but I didn't realize how bold it actually was as a very young teenager. So he thought it was comical, I think, and invited me to stay. I wired his patch bay that day. He had already sorted the cabling, so everything was labeled. I was just basically plugging it in, and from there I fell in love. And then after that I went to audio engineering school at here in LA at Musicians Institute. I was 17 at that time, and when I left the recording studio I had been working at, he told me that was insane to leave, that he had already put me behind the desk and nobody's going to let me do that, and I had everything I needed to learn. But that studio was 100% analog, and I had heard about this program called Pro Tools that I wanted to learn. So I went to school, and after that I continued in the music industry for another couple of years. And then when I was 19, I got interested in sound design. I saw a couple of movies that year that made me wonder who it was that was doing those mixes, who it was that was creating those sounds, those really interesting soundtracks. So I decided to get a job in post-production, but I didn't know how to get in. So I called around to every post house I could find. I sent my resume repeatedly. I didn't have internet, so I was sending my resume outside of a coffee shop after hours using their free Wi-Fi I obtained in the morning. And I finally landed a job as an overnight tape op at a place called Encore Hollywood. And I was doing dailies color. And so I was transferring film to tape while syncing the original dailies audio for the editors to take over. And all the while I was searching for a job or some way to get into sound, because that's where I wanted to go. I found a job. That job was also overnight. My shift was 2 a.m. to 11 a.m., which is
So are
pretty
you
painful.
saying to yourself, what am I doing? This has nothing to, do with I was behind a desk at a studio there, and now I'm, logging tapes and stuff. That was a risk.
It was a risk, but I have to say I wanted to work, I wanted to keep growing. So I did start working at bigger recording studios, and I was not behind the desk at those studios. I had a few chances where I was tracking. I was never mixing. I was, I was running and then, tracking some other smaller sessions. So as soon as I got to the real world out here in LA, I realized that, I had to take a little bit of a step back to learn the trade here before I could progress. And I actually was very happy to have my job as the tape op. I thought it was great to land a job that gave me technical knowledge as well as recognize my skill as a technician at the time. And I think it was a perfect marriage. It was a perfect place to stop between music and film mixing, because I was able to learn a lot about picture that I didn't previously know. So I got a job at a company called Tadeo. It was at the time a very large independent company. And I worked there for 9 years. I was started as a stage tech, and then I was editing on the side. I was mixing every night. I was there for most of my 20s of all of my waking hours. And I eventually, gained clients who moved on to bigger projects, who asked me to come work on their projects. I mixed a few television series starting in like 2008. And so a lot of the times, a lot of my clients who were starting out, I would supervise and mix. So I continued doing that with some of these clients. And then after Tade went out of business, I was supervising a show called Scorpion. It moved to Sony. And then from there, because I had a long relationship with those clients, they knew that my heart, that I very much love mixing. And I was able to, with the same client group, do a show that was both supervising the sound effects side and mixing sound effects. And then from there, I moved over to dialogue, and I've been doing that for the last, primarily dialogue music mixing for the last couple of years. Well, I'd say it's all disjointed because it weaves in and out. I started mixing dialogue in 2008, but I've taken many different steps around and about.
And you're not at any one studio. You kind of go to where the client is working and work within a facility that they're then set up in.
Yeah. We are, a lot of us, I would say most of us are freelance, and then a lot of us work primarily with the studio that we are in, because it's really easier to book shows and to have the schedules align if you're at one facility. But the way that the industry is now, clients have very specific goals as to where they want to be, and so we just work around that.
Okay, cool. No, that's a great overview. Thank you. Nina, how about you? You've got an interesting career there, going back to, like I said, the first Batman film and a lot of these successful films, more recently, Bohemian Rhapsody, Gravity. Your background, you want to talk a little bit about that? I know that you studied film history in school, but not necessarily audio. What was your education and your, introduction to like the pro industry?
Well, I should just so people realize that I'm maybe not quite that old. I was 15 when I worked on Batman. And it was doing work experience. So that was when I was at school, I was very, very fortunate to get the opportunity to do some work experience in the art department during my summer holidays, and desperately wanted to stay on with them and not go back to school. But my parents weren't going to allow that. I had to carry on studying. So that was my first exposure to working on film, and being at Pinewood Studios and the Batmobile roaring around the lots. I mean, it was quite something, and did make me decide that this is where I want my career to be, is you know, in the film industry. And at that point, because I had done that work in the art department and I was really enjoyed art at school, I was thinking that I would move into the art department. So my degree was called Visual and Performed Arts, but it was all back in those days as well. It was a long time ago. It was all theoretical. So I was studying art history, I was studying photography, and I was studying film history and classical Hollywood cinema and mise en scène and all those kinds of things. Lots of essay writing. So I did my degree and kind of came out the other side, and I was like, right, I need a job, I need money, I need to go move out from my parents' house. So managed to get an introduction to a supervising sound editor. My dad was working at Pinewood. He was a re-recording mixer at Pinewood, and he introduced me to a freelance supervising sound editor who was working on some low budget features at Pinewood, and I begged him to give me a job, even though initially it was for no money, and then it was for petrol money or gas money. And then finally I kind of managed to convince them to give me 50 quid a week to make the tea for everybody so that I could learn what the job was, which was great. And actually back in those days, because it was all on 35mm then, there was no digital audio workstations back in the sort of early 90s. And so everything was very slow. It was a slow process in post-production, editing and sound editing, you know, going off to get your sound effects transferred from a CD or a DAT to a 35mm took a little while. You kind of wouldn't get it till the next day maybe. So it was quite good to understand what the process was. Everything happened so quickly now. I think it's maybe a little bit harder to really understand the process that is being gone through in post-production and how the film is pieced together. So I managed to learn quite a lot during that time, making the tea and just talking to the editors and understanding how picture editorial and sound editorial, how they all worked and how that process was going on. And then within a couple of years, that was when digital audio workstations started being used. So and all the companies that were creating them were desperately trying to get the big studios to use their particular piece of equipment. Right. So
that was a selling point. I remember the studios would use that as a selling point. We have a Neve console, we have a solid state Logic console and stuff. And because the pieces of equipment were so expensive, the opportunity to get onto those equipment were very limited because those were the senior people who were then doing it. So the opportunities that were around back then were probably even less opportunities because of like just the cost of the equipment.
Exactly. But because all these companies were really pushing for their particular gear to be the one that became the piece of equipment that everyone wants to use, they would loan it in sometimes. So they'd loan in like an AMS audiophile or something, and I would sit there in lunch breaks and in the evenings with the manual and try and figure out how it worked and that kind of thing. And on the early films that I was on, we had editors who were all working on different pieces of equipment. So we had DAR Soundstation, we had Avid Audio Vision, we had the audiophile. So I kind of had to learn all of them to be useful. And as one of the younger kids on the block, I did manage to figure out how they worked. So I kind of managed to keep myself employed because I suddenly became really useful, somebody who knows how to work these strange pieces of equipment. So that kept me going in an employment, and I ended up working as an assistant, going from these low budget films to slightly bigger films to the bigger teams that were working in the UK with a supervising sound editor called Eddie Joseph. And so it was a great training ground, not just the equipment, but also how a big team works on a big feature, on a high budget feature, because there's obviously an awful lot of logistics that go on there as well. And did that job for quite some time until I found there was one film where there'd been a lot of ADR recorded and not enough editors to do it. So, you know, do you want to have a crack at fitting some ADR? I'm like, sure, yeah, I'll give it a go. And then from that moment on, I kind of started fitting some ADR, and then that gave me the little springboard for the next job to put myself as dialogue editor. And so I worked up then through the editorial roles, generally always with dialogue and ADR, into more dialogue and ADR supervision. So overseeing ADR sessions and getting into more complex films, like Gravity was very complex with the ADR, things like Mowgli, where there's a lot of head-mounted camera ADR. It's sort of somewhere between being on set and being in an ADR theatre. And just kind of carried on working in that way until getting the opportunity to actually be a supervisor, oversee the sort of the whole thing. So yeah, no, it's been, you know, just sort of going through the steps, just go, you know, keep working, and stepping my way through. Or as a freelancer, just always trying to get that next gig in, really.
It's interesting you mentioned that about being a freelancer. And we've talked offline, and two things that stuck out were, one, the relationships that you build that lead to further jobs that you have, where you work with somebody and they go on to another job and onto another job, and it just kind of like strings along, one thing. And also the attitude that you have of always just doing the best job that you could do in the job that you were in at the time. I remember you telling me that, saying, you know, this is what I'm doing now, and I'll do the best at what I can do right now, and, you know, see where that leads. Can you give any advice on, you know, just that perspective? I'm sure you didn't consciously think of that being your game plan, but it's worked out.
Yeah, no, it has worked out. And I think it's just that sort of, I mean, I thought I wanted to be in the art department. I did in the early days. I actually did some work with creature effects on like the Hellraiser films, working with those guys. And I jumped around in different departments, wherever the work was, really. And I didn't, as an assistant, I was like, this is great. You know, this is an exciting role. We're working on these big films now, you know, from these smaller teams and small budget. And at the time, I was always just like, okay, I want to do this really well. At that point, I was never really thinking my end goal is to be supervising sound editor. You know, I just was like, right, I'm going to try and do this job as well as I can, because that will get me the next gig. And so it was always kind of, I just didn't have that much career vision in a way. It was always just trying to work from job to job and do each one as best I could, and really just help be that link in the chain that is enabling the director's vision to get them what they need at the end of it.
Yeah. Any advice that you would offer? I mean, obviously that has worked for you, and that it sounds like it should work for anybody, just that positive aspect of it. But for somebody who's getting into the industry now that doesn't even know how to get into the industry, you know, how would somebody approach, you know, on the lowest level, the junior level, somebody who just got out of school? What would you recommend to them for getting their foot in the door?
I mean, there's various things. I would say that this, now more than ever, you can reach out to people. You know, when I started out, you could go around and knock on doors, which you can't really do these days. A, pandemic, and B, you know, security wise, you can't really get into a facility unless you're working there or you have a reason to be there. However, with social media, you know, I see so many people who work in our industry who are doing tweetorials, and there are all sorts of resources online where if you're really into something, if you just start Googling and looking through the academies and just going through the guilds and seeing what things are on offer, what training there is, or even if you watch a film and you really like the work in it, if you love the sound in it, you know, go on IMDb. Who's done that? Can I find them on social media? Maybe I could reach out to them. People reach out to me all the time, and I don't mind. I'll happily talk to anybody, you know, who is interested and passionate about the work. So that's one of the things. I mean, the other thing is just start watching films with, if you're into sound, like try and think about why sounds are being used. That's the sort of the further goal. Initially, you want to get in the door and do your job and learn the process. But when you're in the role that we're in now, Alex, you know, it's that kind of, it's a very creative side of things, and you need to be thinking about how sound is used in film and how it's used to tell the story. And those are the kind of things that anybody can do who's passionate about it. Watch film with that through that lens isn't really the right word, but you know.
But using, like you mentioned about social media, the ability to actually reach out to people where you're not knocking on doors, you're, you know, emailing people across country or across oceans or whatever, and getting feedback from them and listening to advice that they may be putting up on YouTube and stuff like that. That didn't exist, you know, years ago. So I'm not saying it's easier now, but there's certainly a lot of opportunities that were not available back then, where you can literally look at a film, see who worked on it, and maybe reach out to that person through social media and make a connection. So Interesting
Yes.
that that's, an option these days. Alexandra, you had, I guess, kind of a luxury where you were at Todd AO for a long time. You were an in-house person, and there's stability in that. And then you become like a freelancer who's working on different jobs. What is your advice for getting a foot in the door, and the difference between working in a fixed facility, where there's jobs, I guess, scheduled, as opposed to the freelance mentality where you're always looking for something down the road and what's next?
Well, even with a job at a big place like how Chadeo was, we still would get booked based on our own client relationships. So even though we were in-house, we were still sort of freelance. We only work when we're booked. We don't get paid if we're not booked. So the thing that I would say is that always be ready to take your swing. Always be ready to produce something that you're proud of in sound. Like, for instance, I think it's really important to put your best foot forward. If you show somebody a piece of work that you're not really proud of or not really sure of or doesn't really represent you well, that memory will stick with them for a long time. So I would say something that I always thought of in my career was to not step up to the plate unless I was really ready to hit it, because I think that it's really important to be able to show your skill set right away. And I think that to touch on what Nina said, it really is not about, a lot of people who I speak to now are really interested in the technical part of our job and have learned that inside and out, which is great. Yes, you have to know how to use the tools. You have to be super proficient. You have to be very fast. But what you can't know from learning those tools is how to make something feel authentic, how to make somebody cry in the theater, where to place the footsteps that make them seem eerie, or all of these little tiny things that we think about, just like what Nina was saying about about the thought behind the sound. Those things you should always be analyzing before trying to make your first step in the creative department.
Excellent. Great advice. Hannah, how about you? I mean, again, coming from a different perspective there on the business side of things, I play guitar, I know about equipment because I own some of the equipment. Is that, when you think of the people that work at Focusrite, is that a lot of the background that they have, that they're familiar of it because of their own interests in that business?
Yeah, I would say it's a large percentage of people who work for Focusrite worldwide and any of our brands have some interest in the music industry. They're either a musician themselves or they're interested in production or something like that. But not everybody. Like me, I'm not a music maker. I enjoy music as a consumer, but I'm not a music maker. But one piece of advice that I'll say when applying for jobs, kind of in general, but in our industry, is please don't underestimate the value of your cover letter. And I know in jobs that Nina and Alexandra have, they're possibly not quite, here's my resume, here's my cover letter type jobs. It's maybe a bit more word of mouth and kind of your skill set. But in a role like sales or marketing or something like that, I know that people say, oh, writing a cover letter, it takes so long to tailor it to each role. But if I told you could halve the number of cover letters you have to write if you wrote them correctly and just spent time on them, because as a hiring manager, we get hundreds, thousands of applications for all sorts of roles across the company every year. And if I put out a role, I'm going to expect to have our HR department, our hiring department put forward to me, maybe 50 different resumes. And I read the cover letter first. And if I feel like it's generic or written for the sake of it, there's a good chance I'm going to move it on, however amazing the resume is. So use that cover letter to say why you are not only good for a marketing role, you are good for this marketing role. Like, tell me something that you've read about the company that you like. You're not going to be an expert on every company, because you might end up applying for 50 different audio companies. But tell me something that you've read about the company and you've picked out something from the job description that says, I know I can do this because I've done this. Any cover letter that says, dear hiring manager, I think I'd be a good fit for this role because I've done this before. Signed, you know, Joe Bloggs. It's like, great. You put about, if you put as much effort into the job that I give you as you did into this resume, then I'm not going to get anything out of you. You know, it's a tiring process hiring, just like it is going for jobs. So on the resume side, like, don't underestimate the cover letter. That's your chance to shine. Your resume and your CV, it can be very corporate. But like, I've hired some people or given some people interviews based on some pretty quirky things they've said in their cover letter. They make me smile. If they make the process of trying to hire the right person slightly more enjoyable, I'll have a conversation with them because they seem nice. They seem fun, you know. And I want fun, kind of lively, and just charismatic people, you know, around me and in my team.
Because when you're in school and they're teaching you about how to write a resume and a cover letter, it's all business. There's no room for quirkiness or anything like that. I'm curious, do you receive most of your inquiries electronically? Are people still doing like paper?
Yeah, occasionally. Something actually that was interesting that Nina was saying about kind of like finding people on LinkedIn, reaching out. I will say a short anecdote that on LinkedIn, I kind of accept everybody who adds me. I don't use it very proactively. I probably would if I was ever out of a job and really needed to, but if someone adds me, I add them. But if it's accompanied with a message that is an absolutely bog standard, this is what I send to every single person. It's normally, hey, you work for Focusrite. I see you have a website. We should connect. It's like, no. And they don't even get a response from me. I'll just accept it and move on. But I recently got a message from a young guy who works for a kind of a competitor company of ours, not directly, but someone in the music equipment manufacturing industry, who reached out and said, hey, Hannah, do you have time for a chat about your experience in the industry? And I was like, I kind of looked up
me?
Yeah, exactly. It was just very, very generic. And I looked up what company he works for. And I kind of said, I responded back like, do you want to talk for something in your role that you want to pair with Focusrite and your brand? Or is this just, you just want to talk about the industry? And he responded being like, just want to hear about your experience. And I was like, okay, well, I'm already in talks with this guy now. I was like, okay, I'll give you 30 minutes on Zoom and set up a call. And he was honestly doing what Nina was saying. He was just networking. Like, it was just a young, passionate guy who wanted to get to know people, and he just had a passion for networking. And it was like very refreshing that he was asking all the right questions. He wanted advice on how he could advance in his own career. He wasn't coming to Focusrite for a job, but then subsequently a couple of weeks later I received an email being like, hey, could I forward you my resume in case there's ever a role? And I was like, yes, because I already know that you're very proactive, like, good guy, and here's the link to our careers page, and keep an eye on it. So yeah, never underestimate that personal factor in everything you do. That it's those generic messages, generic cover letters that I know, like I said, I know it's hard to spend time, because, you know, my partner went through a long period of trying to find that good job, not in the industry, and it was painful. But as soon as they started personalizing things, it started to get a bit more reactive from their career, from their profession, you know.
Good advice. Great. Well, ladies, I want to thank all of you for your time. I don't want to hold you up. Nina, I know, again, you're in the UK and it's nighttime over there, so making yourself available, I appreciate it. Alexandra as well. Great hearing about your career. And Hannah, of course, thank you again for your time. Hopefully we can connect again in the future and hear where your careers have gone since our last discussion. So again, ladies, thank you very much for making yourselves available. And I'm sure our audience is going to appreciate your insight.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
I wish we could hang out and chat some more. I'm interested so much in your careers as well.